Look around you. At the people on the street, at your hands, at the face in the mirror. You assume this is just what humans look like. But for most of history, it wasn't the only option. There were others. Not monsters, not aliens, humans. Real, breathing, thinking humans who made tools and buried their dead and probably looked up at the same stars you look at now. And then, one by one, they vanished. Every single one of them. Gone. And you are what's left. The question that scientists have been circling for decades is not whether they existed. We know they did. The question is what happened to them. And the answer is far stranger and far more uncomfortable than most people realize. Let's go back. Not hundreds of years, not thousands. Hundreds of thousands of years. At that time, the planet Earth was not home to one kind of human. It was home to several. You had Homo neanderthalensis in Europe and parts of Asia. Stocky, cold-adapted, with brains as large as yours. You had Homo erectus, who had already been walking upright for nearly 2 million years. You had the Denisovans, a group so recently discovered that scientists are still piecing together what they even looked like. You had Homo floresiensis on the island of Flores, tiny, barely a meter tall, but making stone tools and hunting pygmy elephants. And there were others we haven't even named yet because we haven't found them. Then there was your lineage, Homo sapiens. Anatomically modern humans, emerging out of Africa around 300,000 years ago, according to research led by Jean-Jacques Houblin at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. For a long time, all these groups existed at the same time, on the same planet, breathing the same air. And then something happened. The first thing you have to understand is that these other humans were not primitive. That's the story you were told in school. A neat march from knuckle-dragging ape to upright modern human. Each version slightly better than the last, until you arrive at us. But that picture is wrong. It has been wrong for a long time. Neanderthals cooked food. They made jewelry from eagle talons. They used pigments, ochre, manganese dioxide, possibly to paint their bodies or their cave walls. Research published by João Zilhão and his colleagues showed that Neanderthals were creating symbolic art in Spain at least 65,000 years ago. That's 20,000 years before Homo sapiens even arrived in Europe. They grieved. There is evidence of deliberate burial at multiple Neanderthal sites. Bodies placed in specific positions, sometimes with objects. They cared for their injured and elderly. There are Neanderthal skeletons showing healed bones from severe injuries the individual could not have survived without help from others. These were not animals. These were people. So why are they gone? There are 3 major theories, and the truth is probably all 3 at once. The first is climate. The world between 40,000 and 30,000 years ago was not stable. It lurched between warming periods and ice ages with brutal speed. Neanderthal populations, already sparse and spread thin across Europe, may have simply been unable to adapt fast enough. Research by Thomas Hyam at the University of Oxford used radiocarbon dating to show that Neanderthal populations were declining long before modern humans arrived in some regions. The environment was already grinding them down. But climate alone doesn't explain everything. Because Neanderthals had survived ice ages before, they were built for cold. Something else was different this time. The second theory is competition. When Homo sapiens moved out of Africa and into Europe, they were not just new neighbors. They were competitors for the same caves, the same prey, the same resources. And Homo sapiens had something the others didn't, or at least had it in greater quantities. Social complexity. The ability to form larger, more flexible networks, to trade with distant groups, to share information across hundreds of miles. Think about what that means in practical terms. A group of Homo sapiens struggling through a harsh winter could call on knowledge from people they'd never even met. Information about distant food sources, about which plants were toxic, about where the herds were moving. Neanderthals, as best we can tell, lived in smaller, more isolated bands. Their stone tools came from local rock. Their world had smaller horizons. In a competition between two groups with similar intelligence but different social reach, the group with the wider network wins, not through violence, just through survival. The third theory is the one nobody talks about at dinner parties: absorption. You are not entirely Homo sapiens. If your ancestry traces back to Europe or Asia, between 1 and 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. If you have ancestry from parts of East Asia or Oceania, you carry Denisovan DNA too. This was confirmed definitively in 2010 by Svante Pääbo and his team at the Max Planck Institute, work that would eventually earn Pääbo the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2022. The humans who came before us didn't just disappear. In many cases, they merged with us. They had children with our ancestors. Those children had children. And eventually, after enough generations, the Neanderthal population as a distinct group dissolved, not into death, but into us. This changes something fundamental about the story. The extinction of the Neanderthals wasn't entirely an extinction. It was a transformation, a folding, one group flowing into another until the distinction became meaningless. And yet, the distinct Neanderthal line is gone. The Denisovans as a separate people are gone. Homo floresiensis is gone. Homo erectus, after nearly 2 million years on this planet, 2 million years, is gone. The last of them probably died somewhere in Asia around 100,000 years ago, maybe more recently. We don't know exactly. We may never know. What we do know is that by around 40,000 years ago, only one human species remained. Yours. Was it genocide? Was it disease? Homo sapiens were carrying pathogens that the other groups had never encountered. When populations that have been isolated for thousands of generations suddenly come into contact, the result can be devastating, as history has shown over and over again, far more recently than the Pleistocene. Or was it simply the slow arithmetic of survival? Slightly higher birth rates, slightly lower death rates, slightly better tools for storing food through winter. Over thousands of generations, even a tiny advantage compounds. A 1% edge in survival becomes everything. Probably, honestly, it was all of it. Climate, competition, interbreeding, disease, the slow arithmetic of survival, all happening at once, across continents, over tens of thousands of years. No single villain, no single moment. Just the long, grinding pressure of existence and one lineage that happened to make it through. Here is the part that stays with you, though. The last Neanderthal didn't know they were the last. They woke up. They probably ate something. They felt cold or warm, or hungry, or tired. They may have looked at their children and felt something recognizable as love. And then they died. And after that, there were no more. We don't know where it happened. We don't know when exactly. We don't know if they saw it coming, if they felt the thinning of their numbers, if the world felt emptier than it once had. We only know that at some point, somewhere on this planet, the last mind shaped by 400,000 years of Neanderthal evolution went dark, and the world became ours, entirely, completely, for the first time. Ours. Svante Pääbo wrote about this in his memoir. He described the feeling of sequencing Neanderthal DNA for the first time as something vertiginous. The sense of reaching across an almost incomprehensible distance of time and touching something that was almost you. Almost, but not quite. That gap of that almost is the whole story of what happened. Because here is what the science gives back to you if you sit with it long enough. You are not the inevitable outcome of human evolution. You are one branch, one line, one particular set of answers to the question of how to be a thinking creature on this planet. There were other answers. They were tried. They lasted for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than our civilization has existed. And then they ended. Every other version of human tried, Every other version failed or merged or dissolved. And you, the result of all those meetings and extinctions and absorptions, you are what's left. Look around you again, at the people on the street, at your hands, at the face in the mirror. You assumed this was just what humans look like, and it is. Now, because every other answer is gone, what remains is you, and the question of what you'll do with it.